Well, thank you, Michelle. If you're going to reinforce me that well, you can stalk me anytime you want. I appreciate all of you coming here this afternoon. I know that we've had 2 full days of intense but very enlightening discussions. I know the brain can be a little full, so I purposely chose to share a topic that isn't full of lots of technical information today, but I hope is still practical to you. I hope also when you read the title of this presentation that you read it with a little bit of a facetious tone, realizing that, of course, I am exaggerating a tad. Obviously, to be a good animal training consultant, you need to be good with animals. But the point that I want to make today is that so often, so many of the best trainers I know fail in their attempt to be consultants because they lack so many of the other skills that are so important in being a successful consultant. I know Michael Baugh talked about this the other day, yesterday. I hope that our presentations are compatible. I doubt they'll be in conflict with one another, but I'm going to go the route today of sharing several case studies with you. And depending on where I speak, I change the title slightly. When I'm going to talk to zoological managers, for example, I'll just say a wanted animal training manager or supervisor. Those good with animals need not apply. My PowerPoint has sort of stopped moving. There we go. Or if I'm talking to a group of veterinarians, I change the title. The point is, a lot of times, those of us who are passionate about animals fail to get the training and the experience at those other things that are so important in being successful when you are a consultant. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things today. I'm not going to talk about any of them in great depth, but I'm going to talk about a variety of different things that I believe we need to obtain and learn to do to be able to be good consultants. I'm not going to talk about all of those things, and I'm going to cram it into the next 90 minutes because we don't want to be late for cocktails that I understand are coming right after that. So the overriding principles that I'm going to share with you today are general principles that really apply to all training situations. It doesn't really matter where you work. I always tell people that are interested in working with animals that it's very rare that you'll find a job on an isolated, deserted island where you're not going to have contact with people. You almost always are going to come into contact with people. And consultants absolutely need these skills to be successful from the start. Managers, supervisors absolutely would be better trainers and better managers if they had these skills in mind. Veterinarians and zookeepers could accomplish so much more. Pet owners would get so much further. As Bob Bailey always likes to say, the animals are the easy part. And so I want to talk about some of those things today. I really want to talk about the importance of people skills. They are a must. But every time I go to talk to people who want to get into the field, I'll go to veterinary schools, I'll talk to college students who are interested in working with animals, and I'll say, why are you interested in this job? And that's what they say. I love animals, but I hate people. And I always say, well, then you're not going to really do well in this profession. It doesn't work for trainers, it doesn't work for veterinarians, and it's not going to work for consultants. Our animals might be our patients or our clients, but really the people that hire us are the people. And besides just having good people skills, there are organizational skills that are important. And half the time when I'm a consultant, I find that what I really have to be is a good motivator, motivating people to follow the guidelines that I give them, motivating people to use new tools, motivating people to work better with the people that they live with or work with. Training skills are necessary, but they're also necessarily in your ability to teach the people, to teach the clients that you're working with. And a big part of that is developing a trusting relationship with our clients. That is essential. So one of the first things that I find when I come in to work with an organization or work with a client is trying to identify the actual problem. Does everybody in that family or in that organization see the same problem? Do they agree that this is a problem? Because oftentimes I'll come into a household and find that the one spouse thinks one thing is the problem and the other spouse doesn't think there's a problem at all. Or I'll go into an organization and somebody who hires me thinks that there's a serious problem, but not everybody in the organization feels that way. And ultimately, if you're going to shape and change animal behavior, we kind of have to get everybody in that organization, in that household, to agree, or you might be fighting a losing battle. To me, it's always about finding shared goals. What is it that everyone in this household can agree on that they want to see from your dog or cat? What can everybody at this organization agree on that they want to see from their animals? What I'm going to do as I talk about each of these, sometimes I think I'll share case studies with you that can help you understand why these skills might be needed. I often feel like I have to be the ultimate negotiator. Let me share with you the case that I'm going to call the case study of the marital discord. Years ago, I did a television series called Talk to the Animals. And in that series, we would go into a household, spend the weekend with them, interviewing them, talking about the behavioral problems they saw with their pets. I would put in a plan, help them start the training, leave them with my business card, and leave for a week or two. Cameras would follow them for a couple weeks as they would train and follow the plan. They'd call me if they had questions. We'd come back and see the results of the training within a couple of weeks. I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself there. So in this particular case, we get there, and this family had called in and wrote into the producer saying, we really want to be on the show. And so we sit down to do the initial interview. The cameras are rolling, and I begin by asking, what is the problem? What is it that you'd like to see us work on with your dog? And the wife begins to explain that they had 2 greyhounds, by the way, 2 rescued greyhounds. And one of the greyhounds was sort of the wife's dog, and the other greyhound was the husband's dog. And so the wife started saying, well, my dog is perfect, but my husband's dog, and she started listing all of the things that her husband's dog did that she didn't like. All of a sudden, her husband looks at her with surprise and goes, no, my dog's perfect. It's your dog that has the problem. We need to change this, and that. They had both agreed that they wanted to be on the show, but they never talked about what problems they needed fixing. They had no idea that their spouse thought their dog was a mess and that their own dog was perfect. And while it made for good TV, it didn't make for good resolution of problems. And so what I ended up doing is the problems that they needed fixing with their pets were relatively easy. The hard thing was convincing the other spouse to comply and help fix those things so that their spouse would be happy. Since they both ended up having issues with each other's dog, I was able to negotiate a compromise, saying, your spouse will probably help change the things you want to see changed if you'll help change the things that they want to see changed. And I worked through that difficult scenario, and very quickly, once they agreed to work on the same things, the problems were quickly resolved. So, that particular episode went great. I went on with my life. 2 years later, 2 years, I get a phone call from the husband. He calls, he says, hi, my name is so-and-so, do you remember me? I was on your TV show. Oh, yes, I remember you. He says, well, my wife and I were talking, we felt we should give you a call. And I said, oh, no, is there anything wrong with the dogs? And they go, no, the dogs are doing great, thanks to you. Thank you so much. I said, well, why did you call? And he said, well, my wife and I are going through a rough patch right now, and you were so good at fixing and helping us resolve our problems before, my wife thought you might be the best person to call. And I go, no. I am not a marital counselor. And all I can say, though, is there was a little secret part of me that was pleased that I had done such a good job that they thought of me first for their marital problems. None of us want to touch that thing with a 10-foot pole, but we do want to be good at negotiating. We do need to help our clients find the problem and agree on shared goals. The other thing that I think comes to play frequently for me is I come into an organization and I immediately say, before we can implement a plan, I want to find out where achieving this, solving this problem fits into your overall priority list. And oftentimes I'll ask the person who calls me, I know this is important to you, but where does it fit on your spouse's priority list? Where does it fit on your coworker's priority list? And the reason I ask that is sometimes something that is too low on the priority list may not be easily solved. You know, I'll ask the question, well, how long have you had this problem? And when they say, well, we've sort of had this for 7 years. 7 years? Well, it must not be very high on your priority list. Oh, no, it's really, really important. But I frequently find that when something is that low on the priority list, oftentimes they're not willing to make changes, to make it happen. I know that for me, for example, I recently moved to Washington State. But before I moved, I lived in Chicago. And I lived in my house in Chicago, the final house that I lived in that house for 14 years. And in the basement, under the stairs, were like 30 or 40 boxes that were still unpacked from my previous move. And frequently you might hear me say things like, oh, I really got to unpack those boxes. But why is it they were never unpacked? Well, it's not that it wasn't important to me on some level, but it was too low on my priority list. And so my next question then is, if it's important enough, are you willing to sacrifice something to fix the problem? And then I say the word sacrifice, and they're like, whoa, what do you mean? I said, well, we're going to have to make changes. We either have to change the environment, change your routine. We have to make some kind of change. Are you willing to do that? And often they never thought of it that way. They somehow assume that as a consultant that we're going to come in with our behavior magic wand and go, abracadabra, behavior be gone. And we have to let them know that they have to be a part of this process. And so I want to share with you another example of an example of this. I call this the case study of the seagull dilemma. I was contacted by a park in Europe, and they asked me to come because they had a serious problem with seagulls. Seagulls were all over the place, thousands of seagulls, pooping on guests' heads, making a mess of the park, and they really had a problem. And they'd heard I'd done a lot of work with free-ranging animals, and they thought maybe I could help them find a solution. So I come, spend a day looking at the park's operation, looking at the seagulls. It was a big problem. They had lots of seagulls. And I remember going back to my hotel room that afternoon, putting together a couple of plans, because I often know that my first plan might not get accepted. There might be obstacles or reasons it's not going to work. I had interviewed a lot of their staff and a lot of their team, and I was going to present some suggestions to them the next morning. And I actually put together a list of like 20 different suggestions. So I came in the next day eager, anxious to share with them my solutions. And I explained to them, well, first of all, I know this is a long shot, but one of the things that they had that was the big problem is that they sold popcorn, and they sold it in these cones. And it was a signature cone that they had. It was part of their brand. And people were just spilling popcorn all over the place, and so seagulls were just having a field day. And I said, any chance you're willing to stop selling popcorn? They go, no, we need the money from the popcorn. And I thought, well, could you redesign the shape of your container so that it could be sat down and it doesn't spill so easily? Oh no, that's our brand, we have to keep it the same. And I kept making suggestions. Could we put an awning over the walkway? No, it's too expensive. Oh, how about if we you hire extra people to pick up as soon as it falls? No, we can't afford it. I talked about signage, and I just kept coming up. And after 3 hours, I am beaten down, I'm exhausted. They have accepted none of my ideas. And I said, I think this problem is too low on your priority list. And they go, no, it's really important. It's very important. And I said, well, I've given you every every possible suggestion I could think of, and you haven't accepted any of those things, maybe I'm not the right person for the job. Maybe I should just go home, and I'm going to admit defeat, but I don't know how to help you. Because I was getting so much pushback, I thought maybe I wasn't the right person for the job. And the CEO who hired me says, I tell you what, let's take a quick break. And he had all of his team take a break. Ken, I just want to talk to you one-on-one. And so we took a break, and I'm feeling a little beaten down. And he says, Ken, I really want you to stay. I want you to help us find a solution. And I said, I've presented 20 solutions, and you didn't like any of them. And he said, well, we thought you would bring a different idea. And I said, well, I don't understand. What were you thinking I would do? And he says, well, we heard rumors that you were a really good trainer. We thought you would train the seagulls to go somewhere else. And it dawned on me that in all of my life as a consultant, what do I tell my clients? Stop trying to focus on the behavior you don't want and think about the behavior you do want. And I needed my client to remind me of that. I mean, I was just so focused on all the things they needed to do to keep the seagulls from bothering people, I wasn't following my own advice and thinking of an alternative behavior. And I will admit that when he said it to me, I was very embarrassed that I hadn't thought of that, and at the same time a little belligerent because I was just like, I didn't know what to do. I was like, I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, I guess that is a potential. He goes, take the rest of the afternoon off, let's meet in the morning. And so I came in the next day with a plan. I realized they had lots of land. They had a big lake on their property, and on the other side of the lake was their property. They weren't using it. They had lots of restaurants on their property that had all sorts of food debris that they were throwing away all the time. I thought, well, let's rotate restaurants taking debris to the other side of the lake. Let's figure out a way to start. And I said, I do need to ask one thing, though. If we do this, is it possible that you can stop selling popcorn for 2 weeks? And he goes, of course. I'll give you 2 months. And I thought, oh, thank you. But we were able to put a plan in place, and we were able to train the seagulls to go to the other side of the lake. Thousands of them. I mean, there were lots of seagulls. But it was another really good reminder to me that sometimes I need to go back and look at my own advice, look at my own things that I teach people, and remember not to forget that obvious possible solution. Another thing that I think is important is that we be able to speak their language. And when I say speak their language, I don't mean English, Spanish, French, German, etc. I mean what, if you went to Erica's talk earlier today, she talked about various vocabularies, client vocabularies, and the way we all have different vernacular that we're used to speaking. And we have to make the advice that we're giving our client easier to understand. It needs to be something they can relate to. We have to use examples within the realm of their understanding. Just because we know that behavior works across species, if you're trying to help a cat owner work with their cat and you're showing them videos of dogs, they don't get it. It doesn't make sense. Sometimes it even has to be a similar type of dog. You're working with someone who has a Great Dane and you're showing video of a Chihuahua and they go, well, it's different. And you can say all you want that it's not different. They have a difficult time relating to it. We have to put it in a context that they can recognize, and we have to be careful that we never demean what they have done. We can come in and feel like they've made some really bad choices, but that's only because they don't have the knowledge that you have, and that's why they've hired us as consultants. Not to make them feel stupid, not to make them feel bad. We just have to figure out how to speak their language. Sadly, most of the case studies I'm going to share with you are where I learned my lessons the hard way, where I learned my lessons by not yet realizing the importance of my own advice that I'm giving you today. This comes from many years of running into problems. Let me share with you the case study that I'm going to refer to as the macho factor. About 15 years ago, right after 9/11, Homeland Security called me and said that they were really re-examining their training program with explosive detection dogs, and they wanted to know if I would be willing to come and consult and perhaps start by attending a huge law enforcement conference and talk about positive reinforcement. And I had never worked with law enforcement at that point, but the person who contacted me had seen me speak, and he said, Ken, you really, I think you're able to connect with people really well. We'd love you to come and speak at this conference. So I come, and it was a huge conference. It was a huge auditorium. There were like 3,000 police officers in this auditorium. And as I looked across this huge auditorium of police officers, predominantly men, large men, with guns, and they had their arms crossed, and they were watching my presentation. I never looked out and saw a nod of understanding. I never saw a smile. They never laughed at anything I said. I was bombing, and I knew it. And part of the problem was all of the videos that I had were either videos of this cute little white dog of mine that didn't look like a police dog, or it was videos of dolphins and other aquatic animals that they couldn't relate to. And as I looked across this audience, what I saw in their faces was a lot of resistance. They didn't want to be there, but they were told to be there. They didn't want to listen to me. And if I could read the expressions on their face, I could swear they were saying, all right, dolphin boy, what are you going to tell me about my dogs that I don't already know? And this was a 4-hour lecture. So at the 2-hour break mark, I took a break, got out of that room quickly. I needed fresh air. This was the worst seminar I had ever done. And I put my hands in my pocket and I felt my rental car keys. And I realized if I left right now, they would be happy and I would be happy. It would be a win-win situation. But I lived up to my responsibilities and I went in and finished. But I couldn't find a quick solution to the problem. I went back to my room that night and I avoided, there was an icebreaker that night, there was all sorts of social events, and I said, I'm not going. You know, just even on the break, as I would pass these police officers in the hallway, they avoided eye contact. They had no interest in talking to me. It was a very unwelcoming and unfriendly feeling. That evening, the organizer who had invited me said, Ken, great lecture. Can you come next year? I couldn't get the words no out of my mouth fast enough. He says, no, they loved you. I said, no, they didn't. He said, they did. I said, why don't you wait till they give you your surveys afterwards, and I think you'll see they didn't connect with me. And so I went home thinking, well, that's the last I'll ever work with law enforcement. But within a couple of weeks, I received 2 separate phone calls from various sergeants in charge of various canine units in 2 different organizations. And apparently something that I said resonated with them. And I began working with them, and we began making a difference. And one of the things they said to me at the time was, the officer said, it took me a little while to really understand what you were saying. That little white dog of yours, cute dog, but it just did nothing that you showed us had anything to do with the work we do. And I realized I wasn't speaking their language. So finally, I did not go back the next year to this conference, but I did go back 2 years later. After having had a year and a half of working with law enforcement, having made a difference, having improved their success rate, suddenly people wanted to listen to me. But I also now had videos of actual police dogs doing police dog type work. I got rid of every dolphin video. I got rid of every cute little dog video. And the only exotic videos I kept were videos of me working with tigers in free contact and of me working with a Komodo dragon in free contact. And I just want to show you this video clip, because this video clip was from the television series I did, Talk to the Animals, and it was an example of the use of non-food reinforcers. But what I love about this video, it's an old video that I would normally just quit using, except that it was so effective with the police officers. During the break, after they had seen this video, they would come up to me and go, Komodo dragon, really good. They were very, now when you see this video, it's nothing. There's nothing about this that's that impressive to me, but I guess I was more closely speaking their language, I guess.
This is a Komodo dragon. It is truly a magnificent animal. In fact, it's the largest lizard in the world. Adults can reach weights in excess of 200 pounds. In the wild, they will devour large animals such as an ox or a deer. Competition between males can be fierce, and they can and will battle to the death. The saliva of the Komodo is so laden with bacteria that a bite can be deadly. These animals were used by early filmmakers as the model for some classic film monsters such as Godzilla. In a zoological setting, the Komodo dragon is often fed large rats or rabbits. Their voracious appetite is usually quite evident. These animals are almost always fed in a protected contact setting. This particular male had to be isolated due to his aggressive nature after he broke the leg of another male during a fight. But we had the need to assess his weight, to cut his nails, and perform other medical procedures. So we looked for a training approach that would allow us full access to the animal. During our observations of this particular male, we noticed he would rub his back along the tree barks and rub it into the sand, and we thought he must enjoy tactile. And we started considering using tactile reinforcers that would make contact with him much easier without having an association to food. Obviously, food was one of the triggers to some fairly aggressive behavior. Although the Komodo dragon's skin is very rough, it's also sensitive. And with a concentrated effort, tactile became not only something the giant lizard would tolerate, but actually he seemed to seek it out and seemed to enjoy it. Today, when animal care staff are cleaning and working in the animal's habitat, he will look for us and seek us out and solicit tactile. We gladly oblige, and it does assist us in keeping him occupied while other work takes place. We can tell by his body demeanor and his eyes that he enjoys the interaction. This is a great example of taking an animal with a bad reputation and working carefully to dispel the myth and to develop a trusting, working relationship.
And for me, it was a good opportunity for me to really recognize that importance of what I said, speak their language. Once I was able to do that, I was able to make a big difference. But probably another thing I learned from working with law enforcement is the next tip that I want to share with you, and that is we need to meet them where they are. Oftentimes we go into an organization or we come in with a client who has a set of knowledge or understanding or experiences, and we sort of have to start there if we want to approximate them to some other direction or some other location. One of our goals needs to be to really understand our client's needs. Why did they invite you here? What is the problem, behavior, or concern that they have? And we have to go in and keep an open mind. We have to say, you know what? I am going to pass no judgment about how they currently work. My goal is to help them meet their needs, and part of doing that is I need to teach them how to use new tools before they are ready to give up their old tools. So we have to use approximations just like we use with our animals. I don't know why it's so hard for so many trainers to get this. When we start working with an animal, the animal's here, we meet them where they are, and then we gradually approximate them to our desired goal. Somehow, when we work with clients, we expect them to just jump to where we are, when really we need to meet them there and help them move to that next step. I also think we have to become a part of their team. They have to see that we are as invested in finding a solution as they are, that we're committed to helping them meet their goals. And ultimately, if you're going to change the tools they use, that change of tools has to be their idea. They have to be the one to say, I want to make this change. And often you can do that with good data, but I'll get to that in a second. Let me share another case study with you. I'll call this the case study of the positive reinforcement snob. Maybe that's an unfriendly term, but let me just share this story with you. And I've met many people like this. I come across this criticism a lot. I was speaking at a conference not unlike this one, where I was talking about the work that I do with a lot of organizations like guide dogs, service dogs, law enforcement organizations, search and rescue organizations, all of which, by the way, use positive reinforcement. They reinforce their dogs for making the find, but they also use aversive tools. They'll use punishment in those locations where they feel they need obedience, or where perhaps they feel like they need more what they call impulse control. And so I come into those organizations, and I was speaking about that topic, about the importance of working with those organizations and why I like working with those organizations. And so I felt like the talk had gone well. And when the talk was over, I was standing up here at the podium, well, not here, but at that location's podium, and I had a large group of trainers asking me questions. And we were having a really good discussion. And I was talking to one young trainer, answering the question about something that they were interested in, when I saw this woman coming full speed up the aisle, and she looks angry. And she pushes her way past all the other people and gets right into my space and points her finger at me and says, I am appalled. I am appalled that you would work with organizations that use such severe aversive tools. In fact, I'm even more appalled that you teach them how to use punishment. Karen Pryor must be rolling over in her grave right now because you are ruining her company's name. And I backed away for a minute and I said, ma'am, I am sorry you're so upset, but maybe I could put you at ease by letting you know that Karen Pryor is very much alive. She's just retired. And she says, well, I'm sure she doesn't. And she was really angry. I mean, she was right in my face. I was feeling her spit come at me, and I was like, and I'm watching all these people, their eyes are big, and going, well, how's Ken gonna handle this one? And she says, well, I'm sure she's upset. If she would use what you were doing, she would be really angry at you. And I said, well, I am so sorry you feel that way. But you know, when I had dinner with her 2 weeks ago, she seemed very proud of me. But if you'll give me a minute, maybe I can tell you why I think she's proud of me and why I think she agrees with my approach. If you just attended my talk, I talked about the importance of meeting people where they are. And I said, for me, that's such an important thing. All of the things that I just told you all about, I reiterated again, approximations, meet them where they are, etc. But let me address your concern about me teaching them how to use punishment. What I do in those seminars with them is I teach them how to use consequences effectively. And when I talk about consequences, I remind them that whether they're using reinforcement or punishment, timing is critical. And I am very upfront about the fact that I am a positive reinforcement trainer, and I would love to see them use these tools. But yes, if you're going to use the tools that you're currently using, you're not using them very effectively. And let me tell you, ma'am, why I feel that has been successful. First, one thing I've seen across the board is that when these trainers use their punishers more effectively, guess what? It works and they don't use them as much. I know one trainer that I worked with that over the course of 8 years, when I first started working with him, he did some kind of a correction with his dog 10 to 12 times a day. The last time I saw him, he told me that he hadn't used a correction in over a month or two. For me, that's a huge win. But even more important, the other thing that's made a difference for me in some of those organizations is because I didn't come in and pass judgment, because I didn't come in and tell them they have to stop using those tools if they want me to work with them, I just said, let me show you how to use the tools you're using better, and let me introduce you to some new tools. When my advice for their current tools worked, they were more open-minded to listening to my explanation about the other tools. And they moved in that direction. And if I had to explain where I feel some of these organizations were and are, this is where they were with their use of aversive tools. This is where I wish they would be with positive reinforcement. Are they here? Not yet. But over the course of time, they've moved all the way to here. And for me, because I'm seeing forward movement, because I'm seeing them move in the right direction, I have to believe that that's a win. And here's the other thing that I would like to say that I hope you hear and understand, is if we, who claim to be positive reinforcement trainers, close the door and say nobody's welcome unless they're doing everything we're doing, well, then we just become an incestuous club that never grows and never gets bigger. We have to open the doors. I began my career at working with guide dogs over 40 years ago, and I used those tools. I wasn't mean. I wasn't awful. I didn't have terrible ethics. I just didn't know another way. It hadn't been shown to me yet. And that's often where these people are. They're using the tools because they work. But if we want to see our belief in positive reinforcement grow, then we have to be willing to work with people no matter what tools they use. And I hope that makes sense to you. And she turned around and said, not one bit. I'm going to find Karen Pryor's phone number, and I'm going to call her and tell her what you're doing. And I realized I'm not going to convert everybody. But I feel like I made an impression on the trainers surrounding me. But more importantly, I have worked with many, many organizations who are making this transition. And I feel like I've made an impact on them. And so for me, I stand by that approach. And I feel strongly that part of being able to work with other people and being a successful consultant is being able to become a member of that team, work from within so that you can make more significant change. And that to me was an important lesson that I learned. And when I was being attacked, and I've been attacked like that more often than I care to talk about, but it doesn't dissuade me. One of the other things that I think we also have to do as consultants is sometimes we have to help our clients unlearn long-held truths. So often there are beliefs, half myths, excuses that get in the way of finding solutions. We have to get past some of those common labels, as Susan Friedman calls it, that we put on things. You know, you come to a client and they say things like, he hates children, he's bonded with my spouse, it's a common problem with this particular breed, my father-in-law feeds him when I'm not here, there's nothing I can do about it, there's no time in my schedule to fix this. What ends up happening is they put all these excuses in the way. And again, this is where your people skills come into play, because what you have to do is help them recognize to look past all of those excuses. And what they need to do is understand that it is still their responsibility to fix it, to train it, to make some changes so that they can actually accomplish what they're after. And that's hard to do, because they have this belief about this particular breed, or they have this belief about this particular thing. And my goal is not to tell them that their belief is wrong, but instead is to say, that's fine that that's the history or that's the thing, the issue. But what I need you to understand is I need to shift the way you think about it. Instead of saying what's wrong with the dog, what's wrong with the cat, what's wrong with the horse, I want you to say, hey, I'm a smart person. I should be able to find a solution. I should be able to train this. And I say to them, and that's why I'm here. I'm here because I'm going to help guide you down that path. I'm going to help show you some tools that will help you get there. But I need you to accept the responsibility and be willing to tackle it. I can't tell you how many times I've come across this in my career. I call it I got dozens of case studies of, well, it's always been this way. When I first started working at the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, we worked with the Pacific white-sided dolphin. Those are the 4 dolphins on the right side of the screen. Most of our knowledge about dolphin training had come from bottlenose dolphins. And everybody would say to us, you know, the problem with Pacific white-sided dolphins is they're really skittish. They're nervous animals. They don't have the stability of a bottlenose dolphin. They're not really very trainable. It's a bad choice of an animal to work with. And I said, you know what? I just don't believe that. Are they more quickly startled than a bottlenose dolphin? Yes. But if we adapt and make sure the environment is comfortable for them, these animals can learn. Same thing was true when I started working with sea otters. I rescued some sea otters from the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and most organizations that house sea otters did no training because they supposedly had a short attention span and are very temperamental. Well, generally speaking, their attention span is shorter than a lot of other animals. But part of that is just finding out the right reinforcers, finding out the right thing to motivate them. Today, sea otters are trained all over the world because we pushed past that. We've all experienced that with a variety of beliefs about various breeds of dogs. Certain breeds of dogs are problematic. Certain breeds of dogs aren't capable of doing certain things. One of the things that happened to me in my career is because I had worked in the zoo world for so long, I had worked with a lot of really prominent researchers on cognitive training with dolphins and primates. So when I came back to the dog training world 20 years ago, it never occurred to me that dogs aren't usually trained for some of these kinds of things. And I was at a European conference doing a lecture, and I was talking about what I call concept training, teaching animals concepts. And I listed various types of concepts, and I talked about things like modifier cues, match to sample, imitation or mimicry, counting, quantity recognition. Somebody rose their hand in the audience and she said, is imitation or mimicry a concept that you can teach to dogs? And I said, oh, absolutely. I've trained it with several dogs. And in the back of the room, on the other side of the auditorium, was this very well-known dog behaviorist. And he raised his hand. I thought, oh, everybody in the audience knew who he was. I thought, he wants to comment. I said, yes, sir. And he says, Ken, I'm sorry to disagree with you, but dogs are incapable of imitation. And I said, I didn't want to argue with a very well-known, prominent dog behavior specialist back there. And I said, well, it may not be natural for dogs to imitate. You would know that much better than I. But I have trained it. And he says, that's not possible. And I could see the look on the people's faces in the audience. They're looking at us going, you could almost feel them going, fight, 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 fight. Well, I was not about to engage in a fight with this very prominent gentleman. And so I said, well, I know that I've accomplished it, but and he says, well, do you have video? And I said, well, no. It's like if somebody said that they have a switch in their house that when you flip it, turns the lights on. He said, well, do you have video? And it's like, well, no, I didn't know it was an amazing thing. I thought everybody did that. So in the years that have passed since then, I have continued to do a lot of concept training, but I got to tell you, I videotape it from 4 different angles every single time. And one of the things my most recent study has been counting. I've been working with this wonderful Airedale mix. She was a highly reactive dog that was going to be euthanized at a shelter because she'd bitten so many people. She was part of a study that I talked about on Thursday, but she ended up being a wonderful student for this study. When I went down the path, I called it a counting study. After lots of peer review, I no longer call it that. I call it a quantity recognition study. But let me first just show you, this was a promotional video that we put together for Clicker Expo back in 2015, but it'll show you some of the early steps before I turned it into a research project.
I'm really excited to have people join us at Clicker Expo 2015 because I'm going to be unveiling some wonderful new work that I've been doing with counting, teaching dogs to count. In 2014, I did a couple of presentations on doing some very initial training with that. But after some great feedback from Dr. Susan Schneider, Dr. Susan Friedman, who gave me some ideas on how I might be able to take the experiment even further, I started exploring that throughout the past year, and I'm really happy with the results, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with everybody who comes. Here's a little sneak peek at some of the training that we were doing when we got up to the number 5. As you can see, we're having Coral look at a number of objects in a white tray. Then I ask her how many, and then she goes and picks the correct number from a number of boards that have black dots on them. Those dots are rearranged on different boards, they're repositioned within the boards, and that's all done randomly. After this particular test that you're seeing right here, we ended up moving to a double-blind trial in which she did very, very well, and then we decided to try to move past the number 5 and try to go see how far she would actually be able to take this. I'll be revealing those results at Clicker Expo 2015. I hope to see you there.
So that was meant just as a little teaser. And one of the things I loved about this dog is how much she seemed to enjoy the project. Her enthusiasm was high. And we ended up going down a path where we ended up doing these double-blind trials where I couldn't see the tray. She would go into a curtained-off area. I didn't know the correct answer. I would say how many. She'd stick her head into this other room, look at the board, then go answer correctly. Someone else, a computer was randomly generating the correct answer, the questions. And she did really, really well. So we ended up going to a phase 3 of the project. After getting a lot of really good feedback, it was suggested that she is really good at match to sample. It was suggested that I needed to set the protocol up a little bit differently. And so we started asking questions where we had multiple possible answers that she'd never seen before. There were multiple items in the tray. And this is an example of it here. We were getting up to higher numbers. And in this one, if I would show her a Kong and say how many, she had to actually count or figure out the number of Kongs that were in the tray and then answer that question. If I had nothing in my hand, then she was supposed to count up everything that was in the tray. I'm not giving a lecture on that particular type of training today, but let me just show you when we are about to submit this for publication, and all of them, we shot everything from 3 different angles. We used a pet tutor. You'll hear a little beep beep in the distance. The pet tutor spits out the reinforcers. I don't make the decision about reinforcement. I don't make the decision about the numbers. And I have the tray in front of me, but the room where the answers are, I cannot see. I don't know where the boards are. She sees the number, she goes around a wall, and then goes to answer. So you have 3 videos. The lower left hand is where I am. The lower right hand are the boards, and that's what the person who's watching, who's in another room watching on the video, they push the pet tutor button only if she touches the correct buoy, and there you can see all of the answers. You can see it's going to be hard for you to count and find the right answer quickly, but she's quite good at it. I'll let you just watch a little bit of this.
Can you lay down?
And there's a point that fits in with this particular theme tonight. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
All right.
I got to watch so I can tell you what's going on. I don't remember.
Okay. You see all this?
Oh, I got the little pill bottle in my hand, and the answer is 3.
See this? Okay.
I got into a superstitious habit of asking her if she's paying attention, which I couldn't break myself of. Because sometimes she was so quick at identifying the answer that
Good girl.
that I didn't think she looked at it. So I wanted to make sure she saw it.
Good girl. Okay. You see this one?
What I got here? See?
It's the green ring. The answer is 4.
This is good girl. Okay. Look into this. Coral. How many?
If I could turn the volume off on this, I would, but you wouldn't hear the beep beep and.
Good girl. Did you do good? Did you do good? I can't see what you did, but
I always tell my students you should minimize your talking when you work with your animals, but do I follow my own rules? Absolutely not. I talk all the time. But it became an issue as we needed to look. Fortunately, I say the same things almost every time, so I wasn't biasing the answer. I want you to wait. I'm going to let you watch a little longer because I want you to see Coral's response the first time I ask her how many, and it's all of she has to count all of them. I still use the term count, but recognize the quantity of items in the tray. So here's a tennis ball. The answer is 3. She never had any problem with these smaller numbers. I'll tell you what the results were in just a second of the study, just since I don't want to leave you hanging.
Girl, you are doing good. All right. Nothing in my hand.
Okay, watch what she does when I ask her how many.
You see it? You see what we got here?
Look at that.
Okay.
That became her default response when it was too big of a number. But the total number, by the way, I think is 14.
All right.
Watch, she's still going to get it right.
How many?
She got it. What was interesting to me, though, was if she gets it wrong, she would come over and flop down on her side like that, like, oh, I'm not having any more fun, Dad. But, so the interesting thing about the study was she did excellent, up to 90% accuracy all the way up through 14. As soon as we went to 15 or higher, it just declined it really declined. There was no question in my mind, she was counting twice. She counted the things, but we call it quantity recognition because as we define counting, that's hard to define. But what's interesting is, one of the things I wonder, and this is a total tangent, I can't help but wonder if this is a unique ability for female dogs. Because female dogs have large litters of puppies, and perhaps they need to be able to recognize the quantity of puppies. I have several trainers, they're not my trainers, they're trainers who volunteered to help me in Miami and in Cincinnati right now, who are replicating this study with both male and female dogs so that we can sort of find out more about this. But my point today, this is not about research or counting. My point today is, so often we come in or our clients come in with biases about what's not possible. And I think if you believe something's not possible, either because of the breed or because of something, you probably aren't going to be able to accomplish it. You really have to have an open mind. Otherwise, you're not going to make the progress and be able to do the kinds of things that sometimes our clients want us to do. And one of the things I already talked about that I forgot myself when I was dealing with that seagull case is that part of the thing we tell our clients is, we need you to focus on what behavior you want. Everyone focuses on unwanted behavior. And we often will ask our clients, what behavior would you like to see? What I have discovered is that's not a question that makes sense to our clients. They don't get it when you say, what do you want to see? They say, I don't like the fact that my dog jumps on everybody when they come in the house. And then you say, what would you like to see instead? They say, I'd like to see my dog not jumping on people when they come in the house. They have never looked at it that way. We understand that, and so we might need to help them understand what that means. What I do is I come in with lots of examples, video examples of incompatible behavior, so that they can understand it. Let me just show you 2 examples. One is from the zoo world and one is from the dog world. In fact, the one from the dog world is my cute little white dog that the police officers didn't like very much. When I first brought in our sea otters from the Exxon Valdez in Alaska, we hand reared them. So they were so used to being around people, they liked being touched. So when our veterinarians started wanting to do medical procedures, those otters were wanting to hold on to them and grab them, and understandably, our veterinarian was like, hey, leave me alone, I'm trying to. So we needed to train an incompatible behavior. We taught the otters to hold on to a target. They cannot grab the veterinarian's hand and the target at the same time. So veterinarian wants to touch the otter on the head, we teach the otter to hold a target so that their busy little paws are occupied. They are mutually exclusive behaviors. They cannot grab the veterinarian's hand and the target at the same time. We want to touch the otter on the stomach. All right, let's have them hold on to the target, and then we'll do the tactile. And when we were on land with the otters, that's where they were most dangerous and most likely to bite. So if we had them on land, we had them put their paws and their nose and target it to the wall. They cannot target the wall and grab the veterinarian at the same time. They're mutually exclusive behaviors. And of course, if you just can't quite get it with otters, let's look at my little dog. She's passed away now, this is a while ago. But I loved having my dog in the house, but I didn't want her begging at the table. Well, if I don't want her begging at the table, what do I want her to do instead? Well, I'd like her to be in a kennel. So I taught her to go to her kennel, and at the beginning, yes, I had to turn around and reinforce her every 2 or 3 minutes. But then it went to 5 minutes, and then 10, and then 15, until after 3 months of training, we could put her into the kennel without a door, go cook dinner and eat dinner, and an hour later, we would reinforce her. She would just curl up and go to sleep. But we had an alternative behavior that would still get her the scraps of food from the table that she wanted. Okay, it served the same function, and we just approximated the duration of it. Oftentimes, when you can show your clients examples, this is what I mean. And I have an example of dogs jumping on people. I have an example, all sorts of things where I show alternative behaviors so that when I go in to work with the client, one of the examples resonates with them. And so sometimes I think coming in armed with examples can be helpful. Another thing that I lecture on a lot about is about problem-solving processes. Oftentimes, as consultants, we are there to try to solve a problem. And one of the things that I think helps us is if we go in with a flow chart, a set of questions, a matrix, a set of something that guides you in the interview questions, that helps guide you toward a solution. Whether you're following Karen Pryor's Don't Shoot the Dog, or Susan Friedman's Hierarchy of Effective Procedures, or Steve and Jen White's Dip It system, or at the AZA school that I teach at, we teach a hypothesis system, or in my own book, I talk about a balance of reinforcement approach. What's interesting about my approach is it's fascinating, is I did not start coming from the science. I started my career as a trainer, as a hands-on trainer, and I learned about the science much later. And it turns out this balance of reinforcement approach is sort of what a functional assessment and a functional analysis is. And I'm so pleased that somehow it worked out that way. And Susan Friedman always says, it's not coincidence. It works. The reason it works for you is because you're following the science. You just didn't know it at the time. But either way, my point to all consultants is you should have a system, a systematic approach that helps guide you through the process. It guides the questions that you ask. It assists the clients in ultimately doing it themselves. It helps in them understanding the plan. It helps them in getting buy-in for the plan. It helps when you sit down and work with them to say, here's the approach we're going to take. Here's the plan. I don't know how long it's going to take, but here's what we're going to do. And then they have a better sense of what's going on, and you come in showing an organized approach to your work. Another thing that I think is a key issue I often find is a lack of consistency with the clients that I work with. I have to make sure that everyone is going to agree on whatever plan we put in place. And we have to make sure that everyone's going to approach training in the same way. And I often have to remind people it's not about our ego. It's about the animal. Because that's what happens is, I come into a household and everybody in the household has a different opinion. You know, everybody knows something about dog training. They think they do. And so they all have opinions. And oftentimes what they want us as consultants to do is side with one of them. Who's right? And it's not about that. You know, I always like to suggest to people that there are dozens of correct ways of achieving the results. But if we all go down different paths, we're pulling the animal in too many different directions, and ultimately that's bad for them. And so it's not about one of you being right or wrong. All of your potential suggestions could potentially work, but we have to follow a plan that's doable, that's going to work, and that we can all agree to follow. And one of the things that I have discovered is oftentimes you may not see the fact that there isn't going to be consistency. I just assume that it's going to happen. And so I have to make some sort of a preventative strike. So let me share with you the case study of My Way's Better. So I was doing a consulting job. I work with a lot of different species but one of the species I have a lot of expertise in is big cats. I have worked with leopards, panthers, worked with lions, tigers, my whole career. And I frequently am called in to consult on cat cases. Not domestic cat cases, sadly, but because I love cats. But I work with these big cats. And in this particular zoo, they had an issue or a concern about allowing their cats to stay in their outdoor exhibit at night. There were a number of potential risks to leaving their animals out in the exhibits at night. So it was critical that the animals come into the backup area every evening. And really what they were having trouble with was having a reliable recall, a recall that the animals would respond to well. And so I told them this is an easy fix, I think. If all the information you're giving me is accurate, let me come out, I'll spend a week. The only thing I'm asking is I need for you to have everybody on your team present for the full week. If you can afford that overtime, have everybody for the full 5 days that I'm going to be there so that we can work together and all be on the same page. Because I tend to find that when I'm working with clients, if I only work with one member of the family, if I only work with a couple of the supervisors in an organized program, somehow the word just doesn't spread to the whole family or to the whole organization. And so it's really important to get the whole group together, that they're all part of the problem-solving process, because that way they buy into it, they understand it. It's really important. So the curator said, absolutely, we got the whole team together, had a whole team, we put together a plan, I talked with them about what they thought the causes were, where I thought the breakdowns were, we talked about what has worked and what hasn't in the past. We did my problem-solving process that helps look at the things in the environment that might be punishing the desired behavior or that might be reinforcing the unwanted behavior, and it led us to what I thought was a really good solution. So we started the training that afternoon, and not surprising to me at all, by the end of the third day, these cats were coming back into the back very reliably and very quick. It was a very easy fix. I stayed for the full week. I watched them do it consistently on day 4 and day 5. I felt comfortable, went home. A month later, I get a call from the curator. He's going, I don't know what happened, Ken, it broke down. What do you mean it broke down? It was working so well. I said, I don't know. And I said, is everybody following the procedures? He said, yes. And I said, I don't know how to help you unless I come back out again. So I got back out, came there, and I said, first thing I did is I sat down, and the zoo did a pretty good job of keeping records. And I started reading over their records. And as I started looking at their gating, I noticed on one of the days, they put their trainer's initials, and there was an initials T.O. And I thought to myself, I don't remember a T.O. There was a Michelle and a Mara and a Meg, and I was remembering all the people. And I had met the whole team, and there was nobody with the initials T. And I asked one of the keepers, I said, who is T.O.? Oh, that's Terry. Who's Terry? Oh, she's one of our weekend keepers. And I said, oh, well, how come she wasn't here for our training? And they said, oh, because she's not a member of our team. She's just a weekend keeper. And I said, oh, you're kidding. And I looked down. Later on the records, I saw another set of initials I didn't recognize. And I said, and who's L so-and-so. And they said, oh, that's Lenore. I go, oh, who's she? A weekend keeper. So I talked to the curator. I said to him, I just found out that you have a Terry and a Lenore working with the cats on the weekends. And he goes, oh yeah, they're our weekend keepers. And I said, but why weren't they there for our training? And he says, well, because they're not a member of my team. They're the weekend team. And I said, okay, obviously I didn't know the politics and I didn't define team properly. And I said, well, I think maybe they're not following the plan. And the curator says, oh, they absolutely are. And I said, how do you know? He says, because I wrote up the protocol and I put it on the bulletin board. And I says, well, how do you know they read it? He says, because they initialed the bottom that they'd read it. And I said, and so you're positive they're following protocol? And he goes, absolutely, they're good employees. And I said, well, would you mind, maybe I should work through the weekend and see what's going on. Let's fix the problem, and then let's see what's going on over the weekend. So took a little longer, took us the whole week. We got the behavior back, we got it reliable. And then over the weekend, I met Terry and Lenore. And I said, hi, how are you guys doing? And it's good. And so I watched them, I shadowed them for a while, and we got to a point where they were about to do this procedure, and they were not setting it up the way it was supposed to be. And I said, can I just ask you a question? And they said, sure. He says, I see you're not doing it the way it's listed on the bulletin board up here. And they go, yeah, I know, that's a stupid idea, isn't it? And I said, well, but don't you realize that what's happening? I said, yeah, but this has always worked really well for us. And I said, I understand, but the challenge becomes the poor cats are being pulled between the weekend team and the weekday team, and they're getting mixed signals. And I was able to help them see that it wasn't about their way being better or their way being right. It was really about finding something that worked for the cats and doing the right thing for them. But it was one of those things that happens a lot where I often see a breakdown in consistency. And oftentimes, they don't even know it themselves. They don't see it within themselves. And so we often have to do what I call this preemptive strike to be able to get through the problem. And finally, in the interest of time, if I was doing a 2-hour lecture today, I would give you 10 more examples of things that we need to do. But one of the things that I like to spend a lot of time talking about is the importance of using positive reinforcement with our clients and with the people that we work with. I am often surprised that sometimes some of the best positive reinforcement trainers I know somehow don't apply it in their daily lives, with their family, with their employees, with their clients. And I don't know why, but it's a critical thing. I do entire weekend seminars for organizations on how to use positive reinforcement with the staff. And it's an important thing, and it's an important skill, and it's a skill that most of us who are trainers already understand. But I think the challenge is we learn to use positive reinforcement in a nonverbal way. We learn to watch behavior and respond to it. But when we start using reinforcement with people, it's verbal, and we've never been taught how to do that, and we're not often very good at it. Often we also have to understand the motivation behind why they're asking you to be there. Oh, it's because my spouse unhappy with this, or it's going to make their boss happy, or it's the bottom line, it's to save dollars, or it's to save time, or it's because the neighbors are threatening to get them in trouble because the dog barks all night, or it's because one member of the household wants a clean house. And it was interesting, I was listening, I can't remember if it was yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday that I was listening to Chris Pockle talk about the fact that sometimes we lose track of the fact that we first think that what we need to do is fix this behavior problem, but sometimes we have to remember there's a different goal in mind sometimes. And if we know what that goal is, sometimes it can help us find a better solution. Yes, they want you to fix this behavioral problem, but when I understand the motivation behind fixing that problem, sometimes it isn't the behavior problem that they're really needing to fix. It's some other issue that they're hoping that behavioral fix will solve. And so a lot of times it's, again, about understanding people, being able to talk with them. You have to help all of the players who live in that house or all of the people that work in that organization get something out of it. And oftentimes, we might have to stroke their ego a little bit. It's okay. It's all right to do that. We want them to be happy. We want to help them find a solution. And once we gain that trust, it's important not to betray that trust. We, just like we don't want to betray the trust of our animals when we've taught them to do something like a medical behavior, we work toward it very gradually. We want to gain the trust of our client and never go back and betray it. I learned this lesson early in my career. I'm going to share the case study of the boss that was my roadblock. I was a young trader working in the marine mammal field at the time, and I was working with dolphins. And I was excited about this job. I had started off working with guide dogs and then moved over to working with bottlenose dolphins and with a lot of other species. And we were using positive reinforcement, and I got an opportunity for the first time to go to a big international marine animal trainers conference. And I went to my first conference, and I was blown away. I was blown away because there were trainers who were teaching dolphins to give them their tail for blood samples. They were teaching the dolphins to open their mouth to brush their teeth. They were teaching their animals to participate in their own health care. I had never heard of such a thing. This blew my mind. And I came back all excited, as a young trainer can be, about seeing something new. I came back to my boss and I said, "Boss," I'm not going to say his name. "Boss, you won't believe what I saw. You know what they were doing? They were doing this and this and this and this and this and this." And I was just bubbling over with enthusiasm. And I said, "Can we train that?" And he looked at me, he goes, "Nope." I said, "But boss, you don't understand." And he goes, "I understand." He was just really rough guy. I mean, he knew how to use punishment really, really well, and he used it all the time. And he goes, I said, "No." Okay, but why? He says, the doc will never let us do it. It's just not worth the time. I said, okay. So I put it on the back burner, and then a couple months later, he comes to us, and he's all upset. And he gets the whole staff together. He says, "Well, damn it, the education department wants us to do some training that can demonstrate relationships to the public. I don't even know what relationships are, but hell, we better train something. So I want your ideas of what you can train that can demonstrate relationships." And I thought, oh. I said, "You know what?" I said, "I have an idea." And I came to him and I said, "Hey, boss, what if I train them to give me their tail, the dolphins to give me their tail? And I'll massage it, and I'll tickle it, and I'll play with it, and I think they're going to love the game, and maybe that would be a really good example of relationships." Now, keep in mind that my ulterior motive here is this is where we take blood from a dolphin, but he knows that I made that proposal, and now I'm making this other. But he looks at me and goes, "All right, good, train it with all the dolphins." So each of us had a different relationship behavior that we were supposed to train. So I trained, I think we had 8 dolphins at the time, and I trained all 8 of them to do this tail game. I made it a game. I poked at it. I would rub the veins. I would bring cold liquid and warm liquid, and I would rub with my palm, and I was desensitizing to touch. But they enjoyed it. It was a fun thing. They would give me their tails. So we did this. I must have done this for over a year. And then one day, one of our dolphins is a little under the weather, and our veterinarian decides that we need to get a blood sample. Normally, the way we would get a blood sample is we would move our animal into a medical pool that we could quickly drain, and we would get in and restrain the animal and take a blood sample. But the medical pool was occupied, and my boss was on vacation. So Our vet is cussing up a storm. He's angry because we don't have access to the medical pool. And I thought to myself, this is my chance. Do I risk my career? What's going to happen? I thought about it and I said, Doc, let me just show you something. And I went to work with the dolphin that was a little under the weather, and I played the tail game with her. And as I played the tail game, he was a little impatient. He goes, well, you're just playing with her. What do you want me to see? And I said, well, I just thought I would show you. And I put the tail in my lap. And I said, and I started rubbing along the veins and pointing to them. And all of a sudden he goes, well, damn. You think she'd let me get a blood sample? And I said, I don't know. Do you want to try? And he goes, yeah, let's do it. And so he says, I'm going to go get my stuff. And I said, wait, but before you go get your stuff, can I just reiterate, you're asking me to take her tail so you can take a blood sample. And he goes, yeah, I just said that. And I said, no, I just want to make sure that this is your idea that we take blood from this dolphin. And he goes, yes, I just said yes. And I go, okay, so you're telling me yes? And I said, okay. So we did it. You know, and we'd never stuck the dolphins at this point, but we'd been playing the game for over a year, and I'd done a lot of desensitization, and I was using all these ideas that I'd learned about, and I was going, oh, I sure hope this is going to work. And so he sticks the needle in, he gets a blood sample, he is thrilled. Great, we got our sample. The following week, my boss is back from vacation, and all of a sudden we get a call from his boss saying, I want to see the two of you in my office. Well, I had never been called to his boss's office before. And we went in and sat down, and he looked up at us and he said, Doc tells me you got a voluntary sample from the dolphins. What a wonderful thing you guys did. How did you come up with the idea to do that? And I'm being very quiet and very still, and I'm looking out the corner of my eye at my boss. My boss got his arms folded, got a scowl on his face, and he's being very quiet and still. Neither of us are speaking. And finally I said, oh, well, it was my boss's idea. You know, he told us to train this behavior, the relationship behavior, and I suggested this tail game, and he thought, great idea, Ken, why don't you train that? And so I've been massaging the tail, and the doc saw it, blah, blah, and I went on and on and on. I said, but really, I would have never thought to do this if it hadn't been for my boss. And by the way, the one thing I knew about my boss is the only thing that mattered to him was his boss's opinion. And so I didn't care if I didn't get any credit for this. I was going to lavish it on him. Well, anyway, so his boss goes, that was just terrific. Great job. And so we walk back to our area together, side by side, and I keep waiting for him, because his wrath is harsh, and I was expecting him to yell and scream. He said nothing. He said not a word to me. Nothing. Never mentioned it ever. But the next time I made a suggestion, he let me try it. All of a sudden, because I had pushed a little positive reinforcement his way, all of a sudden I was able to get more and more things and do more things that I wanted to do because I'd gained his trust and I had let him get the reinforcement from it. Why am I picking up this microphone? Don't need that. So we were able to get the blood sample. I was really happy with the results of that. And ultimately, it was just it showed me early on, and I learned this throughout my upbringing. I had coaches, I had bosses, I had parents who were very big on punishment. And I quickly learned the ins and outs of navigating that, and I discovered how to use positive reinforcement at an early age with people. And it's one of the things that I think all of us need to learn how to do better, and it's certainly something that's very, very beneficial for our clients. There are lots of other things that I could share with you, but we are going to run out of time, so let me try to end on time and give you some final thoughts. There is no question that as a behavioral consultant, we have to understand training and behavior. Otherwise, we will fail. It's the reason we're all here this weekend, because we want to get the great ideas that so many of our excellent speakers have been sharing with us this weekend. We do need to understand behavior. But my experience has been sometimes the best trainers in the world fail as consultants, as leaders, managers, supervisors, because they lack those requisite other skills. They lack the people skills. They don't know how to talk to people. They don't know how to motivate people. They don't know how to train people. They lack the observational skills, sometimes the need to assess things better, to get the big picture, to read between the lines. Our clients seldom give us the full picture. They don't always tell us the truth. We need to understand that there's probably more happening there than they're telling us. You need to develop strategies for getting more information. That was another thing that I learned yesterday from Chris. He was talking about, how did he put it? He was doing a consultant. He consults with people, and he will ask them what the behavior looks like or whatever, and they'll explain it. And then he'll ask the question, then what happens? And then they'll answer it, and then he'll ask the question, and then what do you do? Or then what happens? And you just keep making them give you more information until you get to the root source. We have to be better at communicating with our clients, reading between the lines, seeing where there's a sensitive topic and figuring out how to work around that to get to the information we need. And we need better organizational skills. We need the skills that allow us to take a systematic approach to solving a problem. We need to be good at record keeping. We need to be good at data. I didn't have a chance to talk about that, but very, very important. Be able to teach people and an organized approach. All of these things will help us be better at our jobs as consultants. But I'm out of time, so let me just say, if you have questions, there's my email address. You can follow me on Twitter. There's my Instagram account, and here are our websites. If you want to find out more about some of the things that we're doing at Karen Pryor Clicker Training, visit Gretchen at our table right outside. Thank you very much. I look forward to just chatting with you later on.